There.
That's it.
There we go. Okay. We are in theory live. So small crowd tonight. Welcome everybody. Got echo?
Yes.
Okay. Welcome. I'm Justin Ferguson. I know some of you. I think I've seen most of you before. This is our agenda still says July 2017.
Still works.
Hasn't changed too much. Yeah, wish it was July. It'd be warmer.
I didn't know I'm doing the same talk from a year and a half ago. Man.
So, welcome. For those of you who are not familiar with OWASP, I will run through my quick spiel. OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. We are a global organization dedicated to promoting and drawing attention to software security. We are an open source focused vendor agnostic organization. So you will not show up to an OWASP meeting and get a sales pitch. OWASP promotes software security through several means, chapters like this one that exist all across the world, projects which are tools and resources for developers who wish to secure their software, and security professionals who wish to hack into developer software. So we do both sides. And outreach, so conferences like AppSec EU, AppSec USA. There's actually a new one coming up in April-ish sometime that's Global AppSec. It's in Tel Aviv, Israel. If any of you wish to, ask your employer for budget for that. OWASP supports all aspects and participants of the secure software development lifecycle: builders, developers and DevOps, breakers, InfoSec and QA, and defenders, DevOps, InfoSec, network, etc. Our local mission is to try to bridge the gap between app developers and information security professionals, and try to be a community where those two groups can sort of come to a common table, because as we all know, some people can be a little intimidated by experiences like SecKC, things like that. And so we're trying to kind of bridge that gap. So OWASP Kansas City meetings are every fourth Tuesday of the month. I'm mixing up locations a bit this month or this year, so make sure to check the meetup. The meetup is sort of the official meeting announcement venue at this point. And so if you're not a member, you should join that. Meetings are always free to attend, though we greatly appreciate it if you buy an OWASP membership, because we do get chapter funds from that membership. I'm actually working on potentially getting some membership thank you gifts, so that if you do join and put Kansas City chapter down, you'll get a little something out of it. Like I said, Meetup is the best way to follow what we're doing. Join our Meetup group. But if you don't like that, we do try to keep things updated on the website and post a mailing list, at least for meetings, or follow us on Twitter. And you can follow us on LinkedIn, but I'm not going to promise that I post everything there, because it's kind of a thing. So yeah, lots of InfoSec events coming up. So February 6th is ISC Squared. That's next Wednesday. I'm not sure what their topic is yet. They haven't put it on the website yet. But February 12th is SecKC at Kansas Hall. They have two pretty interesting sounding topics. One of them is sort of how to get started contributing to the security community, and the other is combating malicious hardware in shared resource environments. So, keeping people from dropping a Raspberry Pi on your network and having fun. February 18th is Kansas City Women in Security. They're going to do a detailed breakdown of the Verizon breach report that came out not too long ago. And February 19th, the day after, is DevOps KC. They're doing I'm not sure where their meeting is, but they're doing they have a speaker on OpenJ9, which is a new Java virtual machine that's out there. And then our next meeting, is February 26th, and it will be at the Kansas City Public Library, the downtown branch. And we will have Jim Dewey, who is a local gentleman who is developing a secure operating system, talking a little bit about what he's doing with that secure operating system and how he's using some OWASP concepts there. So a little further out, our March OWASP KC meeting will be at the Leawood Town Center Library, where we had it back in November. And we will have Eric Guillen talking about bug bounties, both from a participating in bug bounties and a hiring someone to do bug bounties or running a bug bounty point of view. So it should be a really interesting talk. And the next thing I'm pretty excited about, April 25th, which is the day before B-Sides Kansas City, we are putting together that will be OWASP's April meeting, as well as SecKC's April meeting, Women in Security KC's April meeting, ISSA, it may or may not be their April meeting, and ISC Squared, it may or may not be their April meeting, but they will be represented. We're doing a InfoSec community showcase and happy hour, basically. And it will be, we have some sponsorship, we will have drinks, and we will have short speakers representing each of the groups, giving sort of a short talk representative of what their group would normally talk about. And hopefully we'll have some food if I can get another sponsor lined up for that, but we definitely have beer. So
where's Drexel Hall?
Drexel Hall is at Linwood and Baltimore. So if you know where the downtown Costco is, it's about a block and a half from there. So it looks like it should be a pretty fun event. It's sponsored by us and SecKC primarily. So should be a lot of fun. Keep an eye out, save the date. It's from 6 to 9 p.m. that night. It's sort of a pre-party for B-Sides, which starts the next day. So that I'm pretty excited about. I did want to mention, for those of you who actually pay attention to the Global OWASP organization news, which is probably none of you, but their executive director gave her notice towards the end of last year, and they have hired a new interim executive director who happens to be based here out of Kansas City. So I actually got the opportunity to have lunch with him a couple weeks ago, and he's going to try and come to our meeting next month and sort of say hi. He probably will not be the long-term executive director, but he's trying to kind of do a little bit to turn the global organization around and stop it from going completely in the ditch. So I'm kind of excited about the opportunity of him being here in town. And with that, we can do introductions real quick. Like I said, I'm Justin Ferguson. I work for New Context Services, which is a DevSecOps consulting company based out of San Francisco with a few of us here. And I do this in my copious free time. So
I'm Josh. I'm the guy giving the presentation tonight. Currently unemployed. You can add that into my ethos or whatever that is.
your credentials?
Yeah, my credentials, exactly.
My name is Tom. I work for Disabled American Veterans.
I'm Rob Kraft. I work for a little company called Lucity, and we write software for cities to track what they own. I'm a software architect.
Well,
Bruce Marshall, also currently, I don't know if Josh is looking for a job. He's happy.
I am looking for a job.
well, if any of you do DevOps stuff, talk to me.
I'm Dan McGarry. I work for USDA as student at SEC and try to keep up with stuff since the government's always 10 years behind.
Welcome. Well, glad to have everybody here. That leads nicely into the jobs section, which there not being terribly many people here is not really a big deal. But if anybody is hiring or looking for a job, this is when we let other people know that. Like I said, my company is hiring DevOps engineers pretty much as much as we can get. So if you know your DevOps and have an interest in security and know some development stuff, then come talk to me. So, anybody else have a, okay,
My company's hiring developers.
okay.
Developers.
So, great. Then I didn't get a chance to update this slide, so I'm just going to stop there and let Josh take over. So our speaker tonight is Josh White. He's going to be speaking on web application frameworks versus web application security. And I'm excited about this. So,
Let me lower your expectations. I find that usually makes things more impressive. So,
Sharing the golf map.
oh yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Thank you.
you got a little clicker and everything. That's
Yeah.
right. Mr. Trainer.
Former.
Yes. Put that in. And we should be all set.
Funny, I get something a little dusty because it's like, oh, I'm doing a presentation. I got a little nervous again, so we'll see here. We'll see how this turns out. I'm getting another. Oh, there we go. I've recited this to my dog a few times though, so it is practice. So, and he seemed to be okay with it. All right. Anyway, so got kind of a small crowd. I imagine everybody here is at least somewhat interested in web frameworks, or at least the security around them. So hopefully this presentation will be mostly interesting and maybe a little bit funny. I don't know. We'll see. I got some bad jokes I've thrown in here. To give you kind of a little background of my motivation to put the presentation together, I've been in security for quite some time, started getting bored, started trying to venture out and do a few different things, and development is one of those things. I know I stink at development, so in this little project, I knew that whatever I got into had to be easy to pick up and then quickly gratifying. So I had to kind of see the fruits of my labor to keep me going, and that kind of led me down the website direction. And I also kind of figured, since I spent so many years defending them, I should probably know how to build one or two. So that led me to build a little website here, www.jbree.com. So far it's just the J&J show, but Bree will post something up there. And in the meantime, if you check it out, the /KC is kind of my little fan page to Kansas City and pockets of things to do, maybe things that even locals don't know about. So feel free to check it out and throw any criticism or feedback, whatever you think. All right, so the first step here is just to cover the landscape of web frameworks for the folks that aren't familiar with them. It's kind of a big landscape. I didn't want to use this word twice, but that's what it is. It's a big space, and it can be a little bit tough to get on top of it quickly. So let me just kind of run through, put a couple logical breaks that'll help make sense for the folks that, again, pretty new to this. Everybody else that is familiar, good time to check your email on your phone. So the first division of frameworks, or web frameworks, forgive me, are front-end versus back-end. And front-end frameworks are the ones that ship JavaScript to the client's browser, and then the client's browser takes care of most of the content rendering and application processing. These are frameworks typically like React, Vue.js, Angular, and then the other ones that you hear come up in that realm. We're actually not going to go any more in depth on those because the security of this world's a little bit different. It's more aimed at malware that would be trying to exploit the browser or maybe some vulnerability in the OS. It's not so much in the kind of the normal OWASP top 10 realm of things. They focus more on server processing and content rendering, and that's exactly what the backend frameworks do. So once you get into the backend frameworks, there's 3 hot languages right now: Golang, JavaScript, and Python. I know some folks may have some feelings about me not putting Ruby up there. It is a good language. There's still a lot of great use cases for it. It just kind of seems to be stagnating, and it seems to be hemorrhaging more people than it's picking up. So I left it off there. I'm really focusing on the idea of kind of going after the new ones that people might be investigating. And the last thing I'm going to throw in is, if anybody is like, looking at PHP or Drupal or WordPress, you should be ashamed of yourself. This is a security presentation. And if you got opinions, I'm more than happy to talk shop about that afterwards. Anyways, for myself, I knew Python the least worst, so that was the language I decided to pick. And once I dove in there, I found more than a dozen frameworks. These are just some of the more popular ones. true, or I should say, it's probably true for the other languages as well. You're going to find lots of different projects kind of aiming to solve different aspects of web applications and at different levels of maturity. I'll get into the one that I picked in just a bit. Any questions on the landscape of kind of the lay of the land of the web frameworks? All right, everybody's good? Cool. So as you can guess, again, there's a lot of frameworks out there, and it'd be really tough to go into each one of them and build a presentation that says, hey, this is what's good and bad about each one of those. What is a little bit easier to do is to kind of take this high-level view of web frameworks and give some best practices of things to do and things to avoid to help select a web framework and make that whole process a bit easier. So starting with the things that I would recommend for somebody to do, it's to pick a web framework in the language that you or your shop knows best. And that is not me talking trash on anybody's development skills. It's just to point out that with the web frameworks, you're going to have to build something from scratch. It's nature of the beast. There's no 100% one out there. And one of the easiest ways to open up a vulnerability is to start developing in a language that you're not 100% familiar with. That could be that you don't know how it coerces data, you don't know how it processes data. It could also be the fact that when you start reading a language that you're not as familiar with, it takes exponentially more brain power and time to do a code review, and that's just that much more opportunity to miss something, to open up one of those vulnerabilities. So starting with the language that you're best at is going to help get you on the right foot. Very closely related to that is I would recommend to pick the framework that advertises itself as trying to set your most critical needs or solve your most critical needs. Kind of like really on the heels of the other topic there. It's not to knock anybody's development shops. It's just to point out that when you have to make something, it's better to have to make the thing that's not critical to your site or the thing that's not as much utilized or less likely to be seen than it is the main thing of your site. And again, it's not about that. Again, it's not about somebody's chops. It's just about the level of scale that comes in. There's at least dozens of contributors to all these frameworks, and then there's potentially thousands to tens of thousands of users out there from all different walks of life looking at this code, and they're going to have these different perspectives and kind of different freshnesses and everything. And that's just more opportunity to catch problems and fix them without it being on the same dozen programmers who all work for the same business and are kind of used to doing things the same way. The other thing in that same realm of topics, when you're putting your criteria down on paper of what you need or what you need your web framework to do, I told you I'm rusty, so I should have a drink. Hey, Justin, can you spike the water next time?
I'll see what I can do.
Anywho, if you're new to frameworks or kind of new for the functionality that you're having to build, I would highly recommend putting a robust or a mature framework at the top of that list and also good documentation. So I think we kind of forget that companies don't make money by writing lines of code and fixing bugs. They make money by getting code out the door. So the framework that gets you a working, secure, stable app that's up and running is the framework that lets you double back and start fixing and optimizing things that you wanted to improve versus the one that you're having to kind of build from scratch and in the dark. The last thing I'd recommend when you start kind of narrowing down your frameworks, I would say look into ExploitDB and CVEs. I take it probably everybody knows what a CVE is, correct? That's all right. All right, so how many people are familiar with ExploitDB? Got a couple. Okay, so for the folks that are less familiar with that one, where CVE is a potential vulnerability, ExploitDB is a proof of concept attack and exploit against that vulnerability. And you can download it from the site and try it yourself. There's actually people that will test it and then say, yep, that's been verified. And they'll actually even rank them. So if one works better than another, you can tell that. So you can actually pull some exploits that would work against legitimate production systems like that. So it's probably good to get a framework that doesn't have one of those against the stuff you're doing. So for all the things that I recommend to do, there's a flip side to those coins, things I would say not to do. And the first one I would say is pick your framework based on whatever's hot, so whatever the trend is, or advice from trendy people. Now, I will pick on trendy people a little bit because it's a little hilarious to me. When you go looking at Stack Exchange and really more subreddits around any web framework, you're going to see somebody go, you know what, that one web framework that you're looking at sucks. This new one that's up and coming is the thing to go to. It solved all of my problems, all of them. I kind of imagine those are the people that don't double back and tell you that their site crashed or got hacked because the functionality that they had to build from scratch that was, in the old framework they abandoned was the problem with it. So they just kind of strike me as that type of personality. There's a lot of brand preference, loyalty, whatever you call it in the tech field, and I think we just have to kind of be conscious to not get caught up in it. So one step away from that, I would also say it's good to distance ourselves from the idea that there is a best framework. Again, all these frameworks set out to solve one or two main problems, and then they kind of tack on these other features based on their user base. What does the community need? So they typically do one or two things really well, but then a whole bunch of things just to some varying degree of okay to maybe as good as, the leader in that pack. But again, I wouldn't say that there's ever a best. It just maybe is the best for us at this time. One of the things that I've noticed got people into trouble when selecting a framework was this discussion of speed. In fact, it's the match for most of the dumpster fire conversations that I see out there. Two people are having a good conversation about frameworks and somebody has to bring up latency or throughput, and then the whole thing just evolves and you lose the rest of any good information in there. I think speed is kind of it's a slippery slope in the conversations of frameworks. Usually your web application is part of a whole ecosystem, and whatever it is that you're worrying about, CPU blocking, IO blocking, latency, that can be solved through some of the other systems. And again, give us the chance to get an app up and running that's stable and functional versus trying to get 20% more throughput. In fact, just to kind of give a perspective of how hilarious this can be, I would see a lot of discussion of, again, speed around Python frameworks. And for the folks that are not familiar with Python, it's not the language of fast, it's the language of easy. It's kind of like saying, hey, a tortoise is faster than a sloth. It technically may be true, but you're really judging these two animals based off the wrong criteria, especially when you need your tortoise to climb a tree. You're going to run into some problems. So again, it's got some value, but that's maybe one of those come back and talk about later things versus right out of the gate try to solve. And then the last idea is kind of a hot topic in the security of web frameworks, and that's related to all the do's out there, is get the one that's closest to solving your needs. So one of the problems that people are commonly getting themselves into is that they'll grab a good framework, it's secure and stable, but then it doesn't have this functionality that they need, so they end up grabbing all these third-party packages, and once they import those, that's their security vulnerability. Now their site gets owned because, again, they had to download something off of GitHub that was version 2, whatever, made by 2 kids. So before I jump into the specific framework that I started with and actually put that up against the OWASP top 10, any questions on my perspective of best practices? Any complaints? I felt like I shook some trees. I was kind of hoping somebody would get a little feisty with me.
Got nothing to argue with.
All right, fair enough. So preaching to the choir.
The
Let's be
back
short.
end, you didn't mention things like Java or .NET. Are those in the realm of what you consider frameworks?
I would say that those are, Golang was, sorry, so the divide was kind of a language that somebody could build web functionality into versus an actual like turnkey product for a website. And Golang was one that I was kind of on the fence about, but it seems like there's a little more active projects out there to compete with the web frameworks where, yeah, when you get into .NET and Java, it's kind of like each developer just wants to bake their own. At least that's the gist I kind of got when I was looking through there. It's just nobody ever really goes, oh, we've jumped from this web framework to Java. It's more of like, hey, we're trying to take some load off the developers, so we're looking at a web framework. So, and like I said, Golang somehow makes that, it's too rough of a language for me. I didn't really look into those projects, to be 100% honest. So I may not always be right, but I'll try to be fair. All right, any other questions? Also, I'll admit I'm kind of bigoted against Microsoft, so .NET would never be anything I'd advocate for. Being honest again. All right, so the part that I imagine probably most people at least envisioned when they saw the name of the presentation, I took a framework, and again, I didn't know what I was doing, so I needed documentation that would hold my hand through the entire process. I needed a framework that was robust. Most things were built. and also stable. This thing was just going to work. I wasn't going to have to start debugging a lot. So I went with the route of Django, and I got my security background. So as I'm putting things together, I was constantly thinking about, oh yeah, here's how, I would have attacked this site, but they actually got that. Or maybe here's the thing I need to keep in mind once I get my app up and working. And that was also, by the way, just an awesome picture of Django. I was like, it stood up pretty well. I felt like I should give it some respect. Sorry, Justin, there. Anywho, there's some of the topics of the OWASP top 10 that really don't fit into what a framework can solve or like sets out to solve as a bullet point. And some of that is just solved by kind of the holistic idea of a framework. And that's these 5. So I picked those out. We will just kind of brush over them real quick here. The first one with XML external entities. I feel that most of the frameworks do a good job of solving this by trying to push people to go to JSON. It seems like most of them will have some inherent JSON processing where the documentation says, hey, here's the JSON library module to add in. They really try to steer new people away from XML. Having said that, for most of the established ones, there is a module or whatever you could plug into it. So that kind of also rolls into insecure deserialization by going to JSON, and I would say unless you're really downgrading your JSON library that's doing things like storing functions and arrays and things like that, you're really pretty safe with JSON. In fact, with Django, it doesn't even process APIs out of the box. There's another framework, an addition that you can add in there, Django REST framework, that gives you that functionality. And again, it's pretty established, pretty mature, and really takes care of your deserialization products. And it does it in text and JSON, maybe XML as well. So it's pretty savvy. Heavy, but savvy. The next 2, security misconfigurations and using components with known vulnerabilities. These aren't necessarily tech-like things that you solve. They're more kind of programmatic and administration problems. And these are 2 that actually really get solved by the idea of a web framework, that this community is working together to make this whole project better versus each siloed shop trying to solve the same problems. And from what I found, again, the ones that have been out there for a little bit, and you've got a good user base, they really are good about, hey, we found a security vulnerability in this module, we swapped it out for this one that's better. Or we rewrote this function, or somebody contributed a rewritten version of this function, and we implemented it. So they really do stay on top of keeping everything moving forward. And then the last piece with logging and monitoring, they all have it. It's just up to us to turn it on. Any questions on those 5 as we abandon them forever now? Okay. So the first 2 that we can do something about, I picked out injection attacks and cross-site scripting attacks. And I actually put these 2 together because they're very, very similar. We typically see them where a user gets a text field that they could type something into, and this user goes, hey, instead of just typing text, I want to be funny and start typing some commands, like maybe the SQL command to say, let me see if I can dump all the table information to the rendered page and see what's in here. Or maybe it's dropping some JavaScript in there that says every other user that visits this page, I want them to get a pop-up on their screen that says, I got you, or whatever it may be. Main idea is that we're stepping away from the idea that I'm just entering text. I'm entering in something that's going to process that as an action. And the best way to solve that, there we go, sorry, got past myself here. The best way to solve that is to escape all the special characters so that the underlying applications and the other browsers know, don't process this, just display it as text. And what that ends up with is something like this, just some awkward looking code on a page that just shows this person really didn't know what they were doing. Okay, that would be me. Anywho, it solves a lot of the problem. And then I'm going to kind of pick on PHP a little bit. Just, I don't know, I got a little something in my craw from it. Maybe it was the cold weather. Most of the other problems with injection attacks come from CGI scripts. And that's kind of the backbone of PHP, being able to do this system level processing to kind of shoehorn in everything else that an actual good language can do. So you don't have to worry about that with the 3 main languages that I talked about. Really, probably for any of your application languages, that one is pretty tightly held to the hip with PHP. I know some people leverage CGI scripts in other scenarios, but it's not like it necessarily has to be there. Another thing that I like about, forgive me, my transition, get the correct one in here. So when I took away that SQL injection attack, that also helped me with sensitive data exposure. This is kind of an OWASP grab bag topic. So if you look at it, there's like 10 other bullet points. It could be a whole other slide / presentation itself. I picked out the specific one of a user being able to get information that you never intended them to be able to get. SQL injection attack helps with that. Another thing that helps with that is that Django comes with an ORM. Anybody familiar with ORMs? Anybody not familiar with ORMs? All right, got a couple. Okay, so it stands for Object Relational Mapper. And the idea is that instead of me having to do these SQL or whatever my backend database commands, there's some English in there that needs to be worked out. But instead of me having to like actually know how to get information from a database, what commands, what the intricacies are, I don't have to do that. It just puts everything into, in this case, Python for me, so I can write everything in Python logic. And it gives me this functionality that can really keep me from hanging myself. So for example, with object model, that's a class. So it's some sort of information that I'm storing in the Django database or just my database. I'm saying, look at all those objects and get me one item. So if I write this function, I know that only one bit of information, one object can come back to the user's browser. If I need to make that a little more open, I can throw in a filter action on that one, and that gives me the ability to not wildcard, just a straight wildcard, but to say grab everything that starts with these characters or ends with these characters. You get the idea. So the idea is that I'm writing Python instead of SQL, which I would undoubtedly screwed up, and it saves me from having to learn another language. So just a little more robustness and security and whatnot. Another little tack on that I liked about Django, and by no means am I pointing out that this is like the end-all be-all language. In fact, a lot of people pick on it for being aged. And I mean, as a aging person, I feel that we're still beautiful. Anyways, the things I want to point out is just what you can find in a mature framework and some of the values that are there that you may not have ever thought about just by, again, looking at a subreddit and people going, that's old, dude. You should jump on this new thing. That sucks. Anywho, so looking at my blanks here, I define each one of these in my app. So with like the name field, the interest name field there, I actually say that's a character field. So it's only going to take alphanumeric characters. It's going to escape those automatically, and I can even put a content length on there, so 100 characters, so that if somebody starts trying to launch an attack, or they've got some exploit that's real tight, they're going to try to copy it in there, or they want to try like maybe a cheap buffer overflow attack. It cuts it off at 100 characters. One of the things I love about Django is it doesn't just put that directive in the browser to tell the browser to stop it at 100 characters, so somebody can go into developer settings and override it. It actually hard locks it on the back end. So that's exactly what I did. I overrode it, went up to 128 characters, sent it, and Django was like, nah, not today, son. Sent me back. So again, there's just a lot of like little intricacies they got in there. Any questions so far? All right, good deal. So broken auth is kind of a big topic. Authentication is a big topic. There's companies devoted to just solving this and their own little niche there. So with all the web frameworks, they're going to draw a line at what they offer you. They're just going to kind of put a, we'll go up to here, and then we've got to back off, because otherwise we're reinventing mini wheels. Django did the same thing. So what they did very well, and I appreciate that. And then knowing the limitations, I think, could be helpful. So that's what I pointed out here. So the first thing that I really liked was that there's pre-built login and logout functions, meaning all you have to do is build a page with two fields in there, a username and a password field, and you can tell Django, grab this information, and you know what to do. So it'll go check in the database, see if the username matches, check the hash of the password. It doesn't store any passwords, so we don't have to bake that in. We've got that taken care of. It's a salted password, if I remember correctly, salted hash, if I remember correctly. Easy peasy. It's one just quick function that I copied right out of the documentation. The thing that I would say no before you go into it, if you do look at Django, is that they only do basic authentication. It's just that. Take user credentials typed into a website, look it up in a database, and then if the user's authenticated, give them a cookie, and they cut it off there. Now there are all these other projects, plugins to integrate with like OWASP or SAML, you name it, it's probably out there. you can add in, but just out of the box, it is limited and for a reason. And then the last piece that I would say, just know, I can't pick on them because I totally understand why it is this way. But with Django, the cookie, the auth cookie that it gives a user, if another user steals it, they can impersonate that previous user. Django has no way of telling, I gave that cookie to this machine, and now it's on this other machine. And the reason for that is it would mostly take JavaScript to figure out, the different hosts, and Django's a back-end framework. There's no JavaScript baked into it to go to the client. Like I said, just drawing lines. Now, what I do like is, if that sounds a little bit scary, they took away some of the main vectors for stealing a cookie. The first one is applications that put user credentials or cookies in the query string. I thought this was kind of dead, and I just heard a developer advocate for it like 2 months ago. And when I was like, I don't like that, he called me out. So anywho, if you're not familiar with what that means, a query string is just a way that a user could type something into a web page, and when it makes the next request, it sends a little bit of additional information to help the server know what to give in response. We commonly see this with the search field on the page. So I've got a search field, I type in the words teamwork. Now when I make my next request, I hit the go button. That search, that field gets sent with the value that I've typed in there. Now the server can process the response. What you'll find in some applications is they'll drop in a username, maybe a password, and if you're lucky, it's base 64 encoded, which is not security. It could be the authentication cookie. And why this is a problem is, if I know as an attacker that that's floating around this website, all I've got to figure out how to do is get the user to click the right link in the right location. So if I can get a link onto that site, or potentially even maybe get a script that will execute something on their system that will include a refer header when they come to my site, I now have all that authentication information, and I've got that user. If I got their password, I've got that user for good. So I can be really sneaky. I'm not just tied to a cookie. So by Django not doing that out of the box and taking care of its authentication the way that it does, this hashed authentication cookie, it saves us that potential problem. Another thing that I like is that it immediately does cookie rotation when a user updates their password. So let's say that I do something stupid. I post some debug information on Stack Exchange. Bam, there's my cookie. Missed it. Somebody else is smart. They got it. Now they're impersonating me, and I get the tip off that, hey, there's somebody, about said a bad word. Forgive me. Somebody screwing around with my account. Been at home a lot, so I just get to cuss freely. It's a hard thing to turn off when you're in public. Anyways, I get that suspicion. I can go change my password. That user that has my old cookie, dead in the water. I'm now free. Any questions so far? Anybody almost on the boundary of falling asleep here? So
Yeah.
Imagine the people at home, TV's on in the background now. What's that, honey? I'm getting some not CVEs. What are the
CVEs.
Could you go back and talk about this URL thing a little bit more?
Sure, the query string.
If we're running over SSL, how's that different?
You still run into the same problem. SSL solves somebody sniffing the wire and say get like a packet capture and be able to look at your credentials, clear text, but that's never been the major attack. It's kind of hard to jump on somebody's network and get a network sniffer. Well, maybe kind of getting into devices on a network. It does solve that problem, but that's just one facet. Like I said, it doesn't matter if it's SSL. If I can get a link, or if I can get your browser to ship me as a refer header, the original link that you clicked, I get all of that information, and that's the nature of a refer header. So when I go to Google and I go, that's the page I want, and I click on it, it puts in there, it says, oh, this user clicked on the page from google.com/Josh was looking up porn,
That's kind of talking about a page that's already infected, right?
Right, but it's...
So if the page is already infected, it's possible they could also get to a cookie or headers or anything on the page.
It just lowers the bar. So
Right.
so let's say that I've got a place that I can paste a link, and that link actually gets, or let's say I get it to the point where somebody's like, stupid site's not letting me use it, I'll just copy and paste it. I've got that user. That's a pretty low entry versus me like hacking the site to actually get it to send me information.
It's a good way to take, for example, a cross-site scripting vulnerability and turn it into an actual account exploit. if you can use your cross-site scripting to cause the browser to send that refer string to you elsewhere.
I just think you might be able to use the cross-site scripting and just send cookies or other information. It might be harder to do.
The challenge is if it's stored in a cookie, you can use settings on the cookie to ensure that it's only sent to certain places or certain sites or over HTTPS or restrictions like that. Whereas if it's in the query string, it's a little easier. There's actually, and this is something we talked about at the November meeting, there's actually an HTTP header that you can use to prevent from sending refers to certain sites, or to restrict the sending of refers only to some sites as well.
Yeah, you can just have it disable any JavaScript, period. It only goes to a HTTP site. So you have to click a link. It couldn't be JavaScript doing the redirect. So it's
Another thing to think about with queries with data in the query string is your server logs.
Yeah.
That's
Usually logged.
if it gets logged and you've got access, or somebody gets access to those logs, which is easier in a lot of cases than you might think, that can result in exposure as well.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So the kind of the whole point of this is that these threats a lot of times are just nuanced. It's you gave somebody just enough of a niche. It's kind of like now they got their toes on the ledge and they're going to figure out how to chip away and get into where they need to get into. And the easiest way to prevent it was to never give them that initial hook. And that's just kind of one of those things. There's so many other standard ways to solve it. It's just good to leave that one in the dust. So that was kind of the beef with the developer. He was like, hey, this is easy, it solves a problem. And I'm like, right, but it's not like you don't know the other ways to solve that problem. Those are standard ideas. That's the whole idea of OWASP and OAuth and SAML. So JWT.
We have an app where we actually have a few scenarios where we create a temporary GUID for the user that we put on the URL, because the only URL we can create is a get URL, and we can't have cookies on it.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're very restricted on how we can pass data.
Right. And if you can obfuscate a little more like that, that definitely helps. So yeah, you start shrinking it down so that it's not an authenticated cookie. It's a GUID that you can set a lifetime on.
Yeah, making it a one-time use cookie or a one-time use token is generally that's okay.
Yeah. It was like I said, the discussion I had with this guy, he was like, oh yeah, you just say, user equals and password equals. And I was like, like, hold on. So, it's not good practice, but it's obviously still around since I had that. And it was in a class that I paid money to go to. So, it's opinions, but that's mine. Sorry, any other questions? All right. Thanks for circling back on that. There's a lot of stuff here I'm just kind of glossing over, but if you're the remote bit, the slightest bit curious about them, dive in. I am burning through this way quicker than I expected. We're not even going to get kicked out tonight. So with the authentication stuff, that also helps us a lot with access control. One of the main things, this is another grab bag topic in the OWASP world. Another one of the big, one of the main things of access control is people getting to parts of the site that they shouldn't be able to get to. And of course, simple authentication sets us off on the right foot. Having decorators to help us enforce that authentication makes it a 1-2 punch of easy. So if I have a page that I don't want people to be able to go to unless they're authenticated, all I have to do is just put the little @ sign, login required, and the login that would have authenticated that user. What I like about Django is that if somebody goes to a site that you have to be authenticated, and it goes, you're not authenticated, it automatically redirects them to that URL. Easy peasy. You can take that one step further and add in additional permissions to say, like, this user has to be part of a certain group, so you have to be part of the admin group to be able to get here. Or you could do flags like this poll can vote. Just substitute in there whatever part about your app you want to see that people have crossed first. Like maybe you can't get to the coupon page until you've completed the survey page and you have the survey flag on, or the CAPTCHA flag, whatever it may be. And same deal, if the users haven't completed those steps, redirect them to the login or the appropriate steps to do so. So it just makes it really easy for somebody to not get to an admin page or protected information that maybe only different users should have. Another thing I like about Django is they took full control of their dynamic app page rendering. And instead of putting any sort of directory structure that models the underlying operating system or file types, they just obfuscated in these URLs. So for example, when I go to /blogs, it just grabs all these blog posts from the database, just generates a list and parses it out on the page. There's no www/data/something and .htm or .asp, .php, anything that would give the attacker some sort of idea of what type of system we're running. And then they could go, oh, it's I'm in the www, whatever this site name is or scripts. What happens if I start sending basically command line commands, .. to move back the directory structure and see if I can get into Etsy and cat out password. Let's see if that works. That gets taken away. Also the idea again that if I've got .php files, I've tipped my hat. Now the attacker's probably going to start looking to see if I forgot to disable the PHP information page that's on by default, any PHP admin pages. WordPress is another good example of that. It just gives them an idea of what to go for. Now, having said that, people do scan for that out of the box. If it wasn't for people in China scanning my site, I wouldn't really have any logs to look through from day to day, so on a day-to-day basis. I mean, it took no time at all, and they hit me pretty hard. I probably get about a dozen scans, and it's just all the junk that you can think. It's also kind of a good indicator of, oh, these are the things I don't want to have on my site. Anywho, what I like about it is, again, it takes that connection between this is the URL and it matches the underlying system, giving people these tip-offs of my underlying system and its ability to interact with the underlying server through the URLs that they can type in or they're able to type in. So that covers the Django, the latest version of the OWASP top 10 threats. Now, I rounded up some other things that I thought were pretty cool about Django and also stuff that landed on the previous OWASP top 10. Sorry, any questions about the access controls, the threats we mentioned before? And do we want to take this list from the top? We got the time. I was really expecting to kind of be like squealing around the corner and go, does anybody want to talk about one or two of these?
That's how it always works.
Yeah, go for
I just had a quick question. You used
Sure.
the decorator, which I haven't heard before. Is that just like a redirector for specific access control functions, or what is that?
Yeah, good question. It's more of a syntax, and a common decorator would be the @ like that. It's just a syntax that tells the language, hey, this is tied to like some other function. So if you go to do this, run this other function first. So it's more of like a shortcut or a shorthand for tying into some other functionality. So that's kind of the whole idea is if I have, let's say, /personal information, that's the URL. I can throw that decorator right above it, and when the interpreter is running through it, it goes, okay, I'm going to try to hit this next piece. Oh, wait a minute, I got to see if this user's authenticated first. And instead of me having to like go reference all these different pieces of functionality, it's just kind of there in one nice concise string. So, and it's, yeah, and they're named like very logically login required. So
So if you didn't have the decorator, you have to write a code like, if the user is in this
They have this
list,
cookie.
then log on URL equals that, else, send them a message that they're not authorized.
Yeah, it's just a coding shortcut, basically.
yeah.
But they are very handy.
Yeah. So kind of just doubling back here a little bit, trying to fill the time. No. That was one of the, just kind of the big things that I noticed with web frameworks is that developers are a confident bunch, that thing sucks, I can make that better, it's just kind of a common idea, whether it's voiced or not. And they kind of have a tendency to want to go for like whatever sounds the coolest or has kind of the neatest trick, the new emerging thing. And there's a lot that gets thrown out, kind of the baby with the bathwater thing. And a lot of it are these little tricks like that, just having a decorator to go, yeah, I need to see if somebody's authenticated. I don't want to build all that logic just to go, bam, one line solved. And you know, if you got to spin up a second server to do that, probably not the biggest of your problems. Having said that, I will throw out like a little rant. By all means, don't take that and run with the. Don't quote me at least as being.
Oh, it's on video now.
And video. Okay, then I'll put this on video. At least don't quote me when your shop, or if you're one of the advocates for this, is ready to just like shovel money at AWS just to, you know, make everything as easy as possible and save installing 2 apps just to end up getting half their team laid off and bankrupt the company the first time they get their storage bill. So I am not an advocate for that. I am an advocate for, you know, there's a conversation and there's a too little and too much to any of these frameworks, especially for the needs. All right, I talk enough crap on AWS. I'll go on record, I'm not a Bezos fan. All right, so if we want to take this from the top, I can just kind of run through.
It's better
these.
than Azure.
Do what now?
It's better than Azure.
Yeah. So actually, one of the things that I'm really curious about is why nobody will give DigitalOcean a chance. Like the price is right, the people are
It's actually a good question.
Yeah. It's just as soon as you bring it up, people are like, it's like, what do you mean? Did you even try it?
You know, if you do Kubernetes stuff, they've actually got a better Kubernetes offering than
And it's
most of the other
free.
providers. So,
Yeah. I don't. That's that. Like that is the tech company built by real tech people. I won't say it on the video, but if anybody is seriously considering Amazon and they're willing to give DigitalOcean a chance, I've got kind of an insight to the culture of AWS, and there's just probably some things you should know about how it operates on the back end. So, anywho, if you're a person that champions for the little guy, I'm the little guy. All right, so I'll just take it from the top. I'll run through these quick and easy. If anything kind of sticks, feel free to interrupt me. We'll talk about it. This is my last slide. We could be at the bar in 10 minutes if anybody wants to. And that's including the 7-minute drive to the bar. All right, so a lot of drinking references here. I haven't had one in a while. All right, so one of the things I like about Django is that they bake in a cross-site request forgery protection. It's just on by default. You actually have to turn it off. Is anybody not familiar with cross-site request? Boy, that turns me into Elmer Fudd here. Cross-site request, all right, cross-site request forgery. Anybody want to be familiar with cross-site request forgery?
It's a value that's put on the page every time it's created, so it's unique each time, basically.
Correct, exactly. So the idea is I go to a page in my browser. It can't just be like some malicious script, or maybe I've clicked a link that ends up telling my browser, hey, go complete this transaction or make this request. It has to know that specific token at the time based on that interaction I have with the website, which really, again, cuts down the code to build that versus just sending me a link that I click and it transfers. Banking is the biggest example that people bring that up in, transferring money between accounts. That solves it from being a dumb link versus a link that somebody has to capture information at the right moment to be able to process. And again, that's just in there by default. Like you wouldn't even know if it's there if you didn't look for it. So that's pretty Cadillac in my opinion. Another thing that I like is there's a lot of established plugins, not a lot, there's I think a couple. Established plugins for throttling. So if you have an authentication page and you don't want somebody banging 600 password attempts a second off the page, you can bake that into Django. Again, there's different places you can solve that, but there are plugins that can help out with that. Also, just requests in general, keep your site from getting DOS. Another one that I like is the host header validation. Again, it's just kind of out of the box that when you set up a site, it throws a host header in there so people can't send these random requests to your site and see if anything will get processed. It has to be, for my case, jamboree.com or something underneath of it. That also helps with the clickjacking. If you're familiar with ORS, cross-origin request, your talk.
Cross-origin
If only one of us had a computer attached to the internet right now.
Funny how that
That's the
works.
answer. I'm just going to hang the S there for a second. The idea is that I can set the boundaries.
Cross-origin resource sharing.
Origin resource sharing. Thank you. So the idea is that I can set what domains I'm going to pull content from and tell users to direct to, and that really helps with clickjacking. So one of the most common ways that attackers clickjack is that they'll do like an iframe on their webpage, so it can be like screwjoshsfans.com. So you go to screwjosh, I don't have any fans, so this is non-existent attack anyways. But thank you. So they would totally be able to get Daniel. So screwjoshsfans.com, they put an iframe of my page in there, and then they just put a clear skin over the top of it that users can't see, and that's actually an interactive page. So if users think they're clicking on my site, they're actually clicking on this clear skin, and that's redirecting them to some malicious stuff out there. And the way that I can solve that is when that iframe goes to grab my site, and it goes, oh, you're trying to load that on screwjoshsfans.com? No, I don't send my content to there. They're just going to get a blank window. So it just kind of eases up against some of those little things of those little gotchas that maybe people don't think about if they don't have an established security department. And then the last one is the HSTS setting. That's just a simple on or off in Django. If you're not familiar with HSTS, it just says this site should always be served in HTTPS, never HTTP. There's two ways to get it. If you got a really common site or you request and Google and Mozilla add it to the list, they'll pre-populate your site into the next, well, not next, some revision of the browser so that the browser knows immediately if somebody forgot to type in that S or they get hit with the HTTPS script attack, which just literally deletes the S off the string, it's going to go, nope, we're going to HTTPS. Or if somebody visits my site and I've redirected them and I go, I got HTTPS, now the browser knows to always go to HTTPS. Good protection, low cost, low overhead, low chance of screwing stuff up, so easy peasy to turn on with Django. And again, that's not to say that Django is bee's knees and that's what everybody should be going to, but it's just that's what a mature, robust framework can offer. So when you start looking at other ones, you know, kind of got some idea of maybe what you might want and not want from it. All right, that's my spiel. Any questions about the stuff up here? Any opinions on any of the, let's see, I've made fun of PHP, not really Ruby, AWS, Jeff Bezos.
All deserved things to make fun of.
Yeah, all right, nobody got any questions?
Thank you very
I'm out,
much,
folks.
Josh.
It's a good talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Put
And
this back on your computer.
like I said, thanks everybody for coming, and see you all next month at the downtown library.
Hopefully the normal day instead of rescheduled.